The courtroom was full that day. You could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Lawyers shuffled papers, the judge adjusted his glasses, and people whispered quietly. But then, something unexpected happened. A small voice rose from the middle of the room. "I am my mother's lawyer." Heads turned. The room fell completely silent. It wasn't a lawyer speaking. It wasn't a grown man in a suit. It was a 9-year-old boy named Elijah Moore. He stood beside his mother, Maria, who had tears running down her cheeks. Across from them sat Richard Bennett, Elijah's biological father, a rich, powerful man who owned real estate all over Chicago. He looked shocked, completely speechless. Richard had only visited Elijah 4 times in 9 years. 2 birthdays, 1 Christmas, and once when a camera crew came to take pictures for a magazine. That was it. He was barely a father. But now, here he was, fighting for full custody of Elijah. "Why now?" Judge Clarkson tried to calm the room. "That's enough, young man," he said. But Elijah didn't sit down. He held his ground. With a calm, clear voice, he said, "Under Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I have the right to be heard in any legal matter that affects me." The judge froze. The room gasped. Then Elijah did something even more surprising. He opened a worn-out school notebook, its pages filled with notes, highlights, and documents. And slowly, he began to present his case. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet truth. He told the court how he had spent weeks at the local public library. He was helped by a kind librarian named Ms. Rosa, who showed him how to look up legal cases, trust fund laws, and even court records. Then he dropped the biggest bombshell of all. His father, Richard, didn't want custody because of love. He wanted money. Elijah's late grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, had set up a $1.7 million trust fund in Elijah's name. But the money came with one rule. Richard could only touch it if he had full custody of Elijah. That's why Richard was in court today. Not to be a dad, but to claim the money. The courtroom went silent again. Elijah wasn't finished. He went on to explain how Richard's real estate empire was falling apart. Lawsuits, bankruptcy, a messy divorce. Everything was crumbling. And Richard saw Elijah, not as a son, but as a solution to his financial problems. Then Elijah said something that broke his mother completely. "My father plans to send me to Riverside Military Academy, $500 a month, and keep the rest of the money for himself." The judge looked stunned. "Where did you get this information?" Elijah reached into his backpack and pulled out a small tape recorder. He pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. "Once I get custody, the boy's off to Riverside Military. $500 a month boarding. The rest is mine. He won't even know about the money." There were gasps. Maria collapsed into her seat, sobbing. Even Judge Clarkson couldn't hide his emotions. Richard jumped to his feet. "That's a private conversation. This is insane. He's just a kid." But Elijah looked up and said, "A real father wouldn't try to get rid of his son to steal his money." Then came one final piece of truth. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a handwritten letter. It was old and slightly crumpled. He read it aloud. "Dear Elijah, if you are reading this, it means your father is trying to take you away. I set up the trust to protect you, not him. He cannot be trusted with your future. Don't be afraid to speak up. I know you are brave enough. Love, Grandma Eleanor." The room fell into complete silence. Judge Clarkson took off his glasses and stared at Elijah for a long moment. Then, slowly, he made his ruling. Richard Bennett's custody request, denied. Trust fund access, frozen for investigation. Richard, removed from court. Elijah, to stay with his mother, Maria. People in the courtroom stood and clapped. Some cried. Some just stared. A little boy had just taken on a powerful man, and won, not with fists, not with lawyers, but with truth, with courage, and with love. Elijah didn't just defend his mother. He defended himself. He stood up against greed, manipulation, and lies at only 9 years old, and the world would never be the same again. 3 years passed. Elijah Moore was no longer just that boy from court. He had become a symbol, a voice for children, a light in a system that had ignored kids for too long. His courtroom moment had gone viral. Millions watched the clip of a small boy standing up with a notebook and a tape recorder, exposing a powerful man's greed. People cried, people cheered, and more importantly, people listened. At just 12 years old, Elijah had changed how the world saw children in court. He was invited to talk shows. He was interviewed by newspapers across the country. He even stood in front of Congress and spoke. This time, not just for himself, but for every child who had ever been silenced. And he wrote a book, Every Child Has a Voice. It became a bestseller within weeks. In the book, Elijah didn't blame. He didn't attack. He simply told the truth. He shared how he felt being ignored by his father, how scary it was to speak in court, and how important it is to know your rights, even as a child. The world fell in love with him, but Elijah didn't let fame change him. Instead of buying fancy things or chasing popularity, he started something special, a small project with a big name. Cool Law Libraries. The idea was simple. Put kid-friendly legal books and resources in public libraries across America. Books that taught children about their rights. Books that helped kids understand custody, safety, school laws, and more. By the end of the year, there were 1,200 Cool Law libraries all over the country. Elijah visited some of them. He spoke to children. He answered questions. He reminded them, your voice matters, even if you're small. One day, he received a letter that touched him deeply. It came from a 10-year-old girl named Isabella Reyes. She wrote, Dear Elijah, my grandma was being forced out of her house, but I used your books to learn how to talk to the housing office. I showed them the law and made them listen. We didn't lose our home. Thank you for teaching me I can speak up. Elijah held that letter close. He placed it in a special wooden box at the foot of his bed. A box filled with hundreds of letters just like it. Each one reminded him why he started. At home, Maria couldn't stop smiling. She had been promoted at the hospital and was now managing the pediatric unit. But more than that, she was proud of the boy who once stood beside her with shaky hands and a brave heart. She often said, You're not just my son, you're my hero. But somewhere across town, Richard Bennett sat in a small, dark apartment. His world had completely fallen apart. After the courtroom truth came out, his real estate empire collapsed. Lawsuits followed. Investors pulled out. He was exposed for fraud and spent time in prison. Now, all he had was regret. He watched Elijah on TV, but not with pride. He watched in silence, bitterness growing inside him. But the hardest part for Richard wasn't the fame. It was Elijah's grace. Elijah never insulted his father. He never tried to get revenge. When asked about Richard in an interview, Elijah simply said, I hope he finds peace. But I had to protect myself and my mother. That was my only goal. At 16, Elijah did the impossible. He became the youngest lawyer ever admitted to the bar. Crowds cheered. Cameras flashed. But Elijah didn't waste time celebrating. His very first case? He sued the government. Why? Because schools in America weren't teaching kids their legal rights. And Elijah believed that had to change. He stood in court again, this time older, taller, more confident. And once again he won. The result? A new law was passed requiring all public schools to teach basic legal education starting in 5th grade. Elijah's dream had come full circle, from a scared boy in a courtroom to a national leader who changed the law for millions of children. But even after all the fame, the interviews, and the success, Elijah never stopped being that same little boy with a notebook full of notes and a heart full of courage. People called him a genius, a prodigy, a hero. But Elijah always said, "I'm just a kid who didn't want to be silenced. And if I can speak up, you can too." His story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about money. It was about truth. It was about love. And it was about the power of one small voice in a big, noisy world. Elijah Moore didn't just win a case. He won something bigger. He won hope for thousands of children who now knew they had a voice too. And that was his greatest victory of all.